Good afternoon, welcome to the call meeting. I'm Carsten Boll. This is Jaime Jimenez. And this is the call meeting, as you can see from the little calls here in the background. If you recognize them, if you're old enough to recognize them. This is an IETF meeting, so we expect people have read the drafts. There are some IPR principles, and this is a slide you can look at for a minute. So the point is we have a number of rules in the IETF, and in particular, if there is a patent claim on technology you want to talk about, you have to disclose that, or you can decide not to talk about it. We need a few minute takers. Thank you for coming in, Ari. Ludwig will help you. Very good. Where's Matthias? Matthias is usually the third one on the team. Okay, when he comes in. And Francesca will be the Jabber scribe, and while she's talking, Jaime will fill in. So can you do the blue sheet thing? Okay, so this is the administrivia stuff. We have two 90-minute sessions this time, or you can take notes. Very good. You don't have a laptop, use your phone. We have two 90 minutes slots because there is we have made the experience that it's good to have time between the two slots to clear up things. So today we want to quickly talk about the post-working group last call documents, CREP TCP and links JSON. We want to look at two documents and decide if they are ready for working group last call. We have had a side meeting yesterday with the Yang doctors about Yang over CBOR. I think that was a good input to the management discussion. And we have a big segment about object security at the end. So that's today's plan. Friday, we actually planned a little spillover from today. This time, we can learn. We will talk about CNML, other working group drafts that where we have to look at how to proceed with them, because we may have some personal changes there. A short look at transports. The SMS document has a new author team, new editor team, so that should finally be able to close. And there is a discussion about protocol negotiation. We will do that on Friday. And then at the end, we have 20 minutes to look at various proposals. What is not yet on this slide is something that came up in Sixtish this morning. They have invented a stateless proxy mechanism, and it's probably worth discussing that here. But again, that will be on Friday. So any bashing on this agenda? Anything that needs to be moved because people don't have time? Okay, then let me do a quick working group status. This is our milestones roster. This looks a little bit like Swiss cheese because we seem to manage doing about half of the things that we are trying to do. But some of the other things are really getting close now. So this item here should be done within a week or so. CNML, let's see how far we get on Friday. Resource directory also is getting close. And the other ones, well, they aren't that late yet, and they are also in good shape. So I'm not too unhappy about this Swiss cheese here. Notably absent in that list are some newer activities we are having here. So the list will need to be updated and we will need to define milestones for things like our scope, where we didn't really have a good understanding of where that work will land on the time scale. Maybe we can discuss this when we do the scope slot. Few good things. The HTTP mapping document, which kept us busy for a while, that has finally been published as RFC 8075. And the fetch patch document is in auth 48 right now. The authors have already put in their NITs, and I just talked to the RFC editor. There's a minor detail being worked out right now, and this should be moving forward very quickly now. So these two are done. And I think in particular with fetch patch, people have been waiting for this to be standard. It has been approved a while ago, but we now actually have an RFC number at least to talk about. 2-minute ad from Laurent.
So I will talk about very few words about what we are doing in SCHC compression or for CoAP. So it could be strange to compress CoAP because CoAP is already very compact, but we have some new technology, new radio technology called LP1, where we have a very constrained network. And for example, in some technology, we can send about 12 bytes and we can have 100 messages a day. So it's very, very constrained. So that's what we need to compress things. And so we developed this SCHC that we pronounce SCHC because SCHC is very difficult to pronounce. And it's static context header compression. And it works for LP1 because we have a limited number of flow and we have a star topology. So we use this property to do compression. And we have already 2 drafts. One is for IPv6 and UDP. And we have another draft for CoAP. So CoAP, to compress CoAP, it's something really new because we have the different property in CoAP. For example, we have fields like message ID that can be bigger than one we need in LP1, so we have to compress it. We have also, for example, the option like path, the very path that has repeated several times in the header, so we have also to find a way to do it. And finally, we have asymmetry, it means that a request is different from a response, and we have to take all these things in account. So now we have a draft that is quite stabilized, that has been done by design team during this last 3 months. And now, so we would like to have your comment on this compression, if it works well in all the case, for example, for security, or if we look at some platform like lightweight M2M or other, if we can use this compression without any problem. So tomorrow we have a meeting at 1 p.m. So you're welcome and read the draft on compression.
So I think it's very good for CoAP to enter this space of millibit networks, as I'm calling them. And we have to make sure as a work group that they are not destroying CoAP in compressing it. So this will be an interesting meeting. And it's not IP-WAN, it's LP-WAN. Sorry for the font. Final point for the introduction. We are finishing stuff. We probably need interrupts. So the OSCORE people actually have had 2 virtual interrupts, one a couple of days ago, one a month earlier. And we probably want to follow in their footsteps for other documents that are nearing completion or are complete. Now, all these are application layer standards, so we don't really have to sit in a room to do this. And so we can do this as virtual interrupts. I don't know, Francesca, if you want to say a sentence. I didn't ask you to do this, but if you want to say a sentence about how this works. how a virtual interrupt works. Use this one here. Use this one. Okay, so Francesca will say something during the AskCorp slot. So there you will learn how such a virtual interop works. And the point is you can sit in the comfort of your office, maybe at a slight discomfort because we are doing this globally, so it will be in a weird time zone for you maybe. But people can talk to each other. Of course, they can run things over the internet between the interops as well. And we now have servers out there, the traditional one, coap.me, and the ones for OSCoap that you can use at any time for. Okay, so can you send a message to mtd@ietf.org? What I would like to know is who actually would be interested in participating in interops on these 4 subjects and maybe on other ones as well. So again, OSCoap we already have organized. So next question, that was 3. CoAP TCP TLS WebSockets. You raised your hand for OSCoap. Oh, no, I was going through the list to find out what the level of interest is. Sorry, so OSCoap again, who's interested in that? I know that several people here in the room have participated in the pre-event, so almost 10. Well, the OSCoap people know who they are, so yes. TCP, TLS WebSockets, who would be interested in interop? So I have 2 hands because one guy at home is also interested in that. So that's Jim, Hannes, Olaf. Okay. The links JSON thing, I mean, it's a little bit of a resource directory thing as well. Okay, so 2 hands. Fetch and patch. Nobody wants to interrupt on fetch and patch. CNML. 1, 2. Okay. One more on Edge in Java. On CNML. Okay. So we have Michael and Ari and Cullen. Okay. So the approximate plan that seems to have worked out well for the OSCoap work, and maybe we can just emulate, is doing the virtual ones about every month. And due to the schedule that the OSCoap people have, that's probably going to be closer to the end of the month. So by the end of April, we would have one. By the end of May. Maybe not quite at the end of June. So the next physical one would be in Prague. And one question I have tried to find out an answer for is, can we actually get Etsy to support us there, like they did for the 4 CoAP interops? Unfortunately, the funding they had for the CoAP interops, that isn't available for this, so we may have to run this as a low budget thing, but who thinks that would be a good idea to have Etsy around for a more formal interop? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, good. So I think I can relay that. And with that, let's go into the first item, the post-working group last call documents, and we'll hear a summary from Brian.
So there have been a few drafts since the IETF install. Each slide will have pointers to the issues in the GitHub that were resolved during that milestone if anyone wants to look at the details. You can recall in Seoul and Berlin, both, we had a lot of conversations about securing CoAP and what was the appropriate language there. So basically now we have a compromise where a security solution is mandatory to implement and mandatory to be enabled, but we don't specify what that solution necessarily is. There's a TLS binding and a specification that's similar to RFC 7252. There's also an informative reference to OS CoAP as here's another approach that could be pursued. We also removed the, I think it used to be called default URI and its error message from the options. It had been there for a while from much older discussions as being some way of setting the default URI host for CoAP. In the TCP case, there's already solutions for TLS and WebSockets. We talked to implementers and no one had really implemented this behavior, and we found it very confusing to have to say, only use it for this case, don't use it in these other cases. Didn't seem particularly useful in the long run, so that was deprecated. We clarified capability and settings, the message exchanged at the opening handshake to prevent deadlock. So basically, the initiator must not wait for the acceptor of the connection to send its initial capabilities and settings, but the acceptor may wait. We updated the Pong response requirements to bring them more in line with similar designs in WebSockets and HTTP2. Basically to say that a response should be returned as soon as practical unless there is a delaying semantic such as the custody option being used. We had a second working group last call to encourage more participation. Thanks very much for all the feedback from ESCO. There's a number of editorial issues, but we also added some additional guidance. So in the case of CoAP over UDP, for message syntax errors, you can return a reset. In the case of CoAP over TCP or reliable transports, we're indicating that in those cases you should return an abort message. There was also a question about in the case where you have multiple alternative addresses, what do you do for that case? Is there priority ordering or something? And basically we clarified to indicate that it's an unordered list and the receiver can choose any of the various addresses. As Karsten noted, this has been submitted to the ISG for publication. There's an editor's draft pending that resolved a few issues, mostly editorial, but also addressed a pending erratum for RFC 7252 because the URI schemes didn't include the use of the URI fragment. It's not something that's transmitted by the protocol, but it's something that can be used by the client. And currently, CineML is already starting to use this. Alexi's review is completed, and he's indicated that there's no blocking issues. He's going to send a message soon. Secret review. IETF last call is announced running through the 9th of April. And Karsten's already talked about whether or not we should stage an interop event.
So from my review to be posted, there are some missing references, which are basically nits. The only question I had was about CSM message and the version negotiation, which is not there, might be addressed in the future. I'm sorry if I missed this in the working group. Can you just talk a little bit about this? How?
So there was a lot of discussion around whether or not we needed version negotiation. In the case of WebSockets, it could be handled during the WebSocket subprotocol negotiation. We didn't see any reason to change the version number now, and it's something it's a capability that we can add later. I think there are notes to that effect in the draft itself.
Yeah, it was basically a bit hand-wavy. It was at the point when it said, well, version is removed, but you can use CSM, and there might be an option that will define the version, but there is no option now for the version number. I'm just trying to there is a bit of a hand-waving here. So
absolutely. So the observation is versions are overrated. And they often do not solve the problem that they are trying to solve. And once we have a problem, we don't know what that problem will be. It's probably more appropriate to design something that is solving exactly that problem. And putting in a version negotiation mechanism now, given that we don't know what that problem will be, sounds wrong. But we do have the hooks, the capability and settings mechanisms that allow you to do that. So it will not be a change that will confuse nodes or anything like that. There will be no interoperability issue with it.
We have some examples of protocols that go into a bit more details about what kind of changes are breaking, which kind of changes require major version update or minor version. So we probably can find text if the working group really wants to, but yeah, let me think a little bit about this.
So the hope is
because one thing about if you want to use CSM, you're probably saying that generally CSM frame, whatever it is, message is not going to change in the future effectively. So you might define new options, but they don't require, you know, the message format to change.
for the CSM
So, which
message.
is, you know, some form of a guarantee for the future. And if it has to change, then, well, you just define entirely new mapping.
Right.
So,
But do we have to do all that in the document? That's really my question.
at the moment, I'm not feeling very strong about this, but let me just think.
Okay.
I'll try to be as constructive as possible about this.
Thank you.
I don't think there is a need to block the document on this point. Let's put it this way. That's why it's not blocking. But if I have a suggestion, which is a small fix, or if I decided I just let it go, I'll let you know.
Sure.
Let me double check. I'm pretty sure that we've captured this in a GitHub issue, the whole discussion, so that you can see Karsten's point of view on this and some of the other discussions around it. Just for background.
Which number?
So there was an issue on this.
I'm pretty sure.
It's on the, I wrote it on the minutes, it's issue number 20 there.
Thank you.
Just to comment on the interoperability, I had a conversation with one of the chairs over the model reception. I'll just repeat the same thing that here, which is OCF does depend on this draft. Although it doesn't depend on it yet in a certifiable way, right? In other words, that's punching through a future version. The only thing that's certifiable is the CoAP, not the CoAP TCP version. And so having this be done sooner than later is certainly something that the OCF would want. And I see Michael had heard now. So the question that I was asked was, would OCF be interested in interoperability given that they actually have an implementation of this draft? And what I had answered is says, well, in theory, yes, but the question is, what application layer thing we put over that? And so it's only interesting if both sides use the transport and can send messages that the other side can receive, right? And that's the part that's kind of, well, I don't know, I can take that back to people because they have interrupt events themselves within OCF, where both sides are using the OCF protocol over CoAP or CoAP TCP, which is interesting, and they already have those interrupt events. The question here was, would there be an interested in a non-OCF interrupt event? And the question is, could an OCF implementation of the application layer over this talk to anything else that would be that interrupt event? And so I said, well, it's actually not clear whether they would want to interrupt there, given they have their own. They would be interested if they could actually talk to something else, but that's kind of the question there. And so, yes, I would say on behalf of OCF, I think OCF is all in favor of interrupt events, but what's the application layer part above that? And that's something anybody participating in this interrupt event can think about, right? Yes, you can establish a connection. Okay.
So Yeah, so the question is, what do the test descriptions actually say that we build for these interrupt events? And one, right, but one thing could be looking at /OIC/res and seeing if it's there. Looking at /OIC/res and see if it's there. So that's a very basic thing, and we could write that into the test description.
A number of people that were in the joint meeting know this, but the paths, right? IETF tends to use, not well known that for, and so on. OCF uses a different set of ones, and so you can't just take a normal implementation of the IETF graph and interop with the OCF ones. The paths are different, right? Even though the protocol is the same. And so, yes, test cases like that have to convince people with the and say OCF to come and bring your up stuff to a more general OCF thing.
Thank you.
I agree with Dave that we obviously have to, in the preparation of such a detailed intro, figure out what exactly the test cases are. That's typically the trick in time-consuming part. However, I believe it should be possible with most of the implementations to do interrupt testing, even though, for example, if you use guys working on lightweight NPM and those from the OCF OIC community, that should still work because the implementation will most likely have the protocol stack there, not totally much together before the higher layer protocols. At least that's true for ours. So we would just test the co-op library that we use in the global stack rather than worry about all the rest. And because there you suddenly end up into lots of issues from security configuration, etc., etc.
Yeah, so the reason why we may need about a month to actually set this up is to actually write the test description and then to give people a chance to actually set up the test so this makes sense. So that's why we put this at the end of April, and I think this is pretty much the fastest that we can do. Okay, thank you, Brian. I just want to mention that the over TCP document was also an experiment of running the GitHub process, whatever that is evolving to be, and putting on my chair hat, even though I'm not a chair on this document, it worked pretty well. So we are now looking at other documents, whether we can move in particular the finishing part over to the GitHub process, and it seems the first victim will be the resource directory, and we will come to that in a couple of minutes. Okay, the other document that just finished working group last call is callings JSON. Now, most of you will probably wonder, isn't that all done by now? No, unfortunately, it's not. So in Berlin, we decided that we just wanted to cut down the grandiose language in that document a little bit and align the abstract with what's actually in the document and not the other way around. So the document has no technical changes at this point in time. And we finished the second work group last call, and Jaime is preparing the write-up, so this should go to Alexei soon. Okay, so one interesting discussion that we should be having at some point is how do OCF's similar data formats mesh with this? But yeah, that's a discussion for the future and not necessarily something that influences this document. Okay, so then we can go to the next segment. We have two documents that are getting very close to working group last call. We have 15 minutes for this segment, so we will try to be brief, but maybe Carlos can begin with giving a quick summary of where we are with Coco.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Carlos Gomez. I am from UPC. I'm one of the authors of the draft entitled COAP Simple Congestion Control Advanced, also known as COCO. So I'm going to present the last update of this draft. So the document has been a working group document since October, and the last update is -01. So right now the document is mostly stable, especially the core, the body of the document. However, there have been a couple of updates in this last revision, which are the addition of a new appendix, which is Appendix B, entitled Supporting Evidence, and also an update of the weak estimator discussion, which has been prompted by the recent publication of RFC 8085 on UDP usage guidelines, which contains some guidance about congestion control for protocols that use UDP. So let's go through the updates in this last revision. The first one is a new appendix supporting evidence, which is a summary of evaluation results plus the corresponding references on research work which has been carried out in order to evaluate the performance of COCO along with that of default COAP and also other congestion control mechanisms. So the overall result appears to be that COCO consistently outperforms, or at least has a similar performance to that of default COAP, and that's because COCO is adaptive and it appears to make good use of RTT samples, while default COAP is insensitive to network conditions. So some of the performance parameters that have been used in this research work comprise throughput or PDR, settling time after a burst of messages, fairness, latency, and so on. So in the evaluations, both cons and nons have been taken into account. So for nons, we have also, the research has shown that COCO performs better as well across the different scenarios compared with default COAP, which for nons does not apply any specific congestion control, and also better than observe, which does apply congestion control, however, it is static. So a question we have for the working group is whether this appendix should be included if or when the document is finally published. So any thoughts about this?
This is Matthias. So I think this was published in papers. So citing those papers and referencing them should be enough.
Yeah, so the text is relatively not so long. And I think one of the main reasons behind this text is to give somewhere to put the references. So yeah, I don't know if you mean maybe something even shorter and just keeping the references.
Okay, if it's really a nice summary, then and it's really short, then you can keep it. I mean, that was my comment on this.
Okay.
It mostly is an overview of what the 10 papers that are being referenced actually provide. So you know which paper to look into.
Okay. So the other update is a discussion of the section about the measured RTO estimation. So as you may recall, COCO uses strong and weak RTTs. Weak RTTs are those RTTs which are obtained after the sender has run into retransmissions. So we have that RFC 8085 states that latency samples must not be derived from ambiguous transactions. However, what we argue is that weak RTTs are not directly combined into the strong estimator. Instead, they are just used to correct the sometimes limited knowledge from strong RTTs by employing an additional RTT estimator, and evidence from experiments referenced in Appendix B appears to support that this is actually beneficial. So just a quick reminder that we have running code. COCO has been available for Californium for a while. Californium is the reference COAP implementation for unconstrained devices. And also COCO has been implemented for Erbium, which is the official COAP implementation for Contiki OS. And recently, libcoap was ported to Android, including COCO as well. This is some work done by Jin Sao and some colleagues of his in a recent draft. So at this point, the authors of the document think that the document is ready for working group last call, possibly minus Appendix A, which provides an algorithm for aggregate congestion control. However, this part has not been as deeply evaluated as the rest of the document, the core of the document. So actually, our plan would be to extract this part into a separate, totally new document. So our proposal would be to offer for consideration for working group last call the document minus Appendix A. So any comments about this? Any thoughts?
So who has read a version of the draft IETF, the working group document, either this 01 or the previous one? Okay, I'm seeing 2 hands. It's kind of more of interest to implement us. It has no application layer implications except that things are just going faster. So well, one thing that you would have to do to get a reasonable response in the working group last call is involve other groups. For instance, the Internet Congestion Control Research Group, the TCP maintenance working group. These are 2 groups that actually have looked at previous versions of this document. So the idea would be to have a wide working group last call, not just this working group. But in the end, of course, the core protocol also needs to work with this. So it would be good if more people actually looked at this. There are a few equations in there, but they are pretty simple equations, so they shouldn't be too much of a burden. So I don't think we saw enough hands going up to actually being able to answer this here in the room. Sorry, Jaime should be saying.
Yeah, so we take it to the mailing list and we'll try to contact the other groups to get more feedback. But then, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Carlos. So the next document we should be looking at is the resource directory. That has been stable, technically stable for quite some time. It's in use by other SDOs. At least they're using parts of it. Just has taken a long time to finally get the I's dotted and the T's stroked. So one thing we discussed in Seoul was splitting off the DNSSD work into a separate document, and something that Jaime has initiated recently was finding an editor that would have a similar role for the resource directory that Brian had for CORP over TCP. So I think we are gaining speed here again, and now my proposal, and I'm not should be standing at that microphone, I'm sorry. My proposal is to continue with this split as discussed in Seoul for several reasons. One, to have maybe other people on that draft, so we can get a little bit of fresh blood on that part. It's not a particularly long or complicated document, but it does require some knowledge about DNSSD, which many people in this room don't have. And also maybe to have a document that is more visible in the DNSSD community, so we can get additional review from that community. And it's nice to see that Stuart, for instance, is in the room. But the split does not mean that we put the DNSSD work on long-term schedule or something like that. This is a cluster of documents which will be finished together. So we continue the work on the same timescale. That's the proposal. And the other proposal is to operate the process on both documents in the same way that we have been operating the CORP over TCP work, the GitHub approach, collecting issues, making pull requests. And it's the job of the editor to merge these documents. So that's the overall picture, and Kerry has a comment on that.
Carrie Lynn, I would like to argue against splitting the DNSSD part out from the RD. Those of you who have a long history with this group recall that when it was originally chartered, doing a discovery mechanism was not in the charter. Peter Vanderstock and I spent something like 2 years trying to imagine or trying to discuss with this group every possible way to use DNSSD as one method of discovering resources in a CoAP network. I wrote a draft I finally wrote a draft that said, all right, I'm pretty sure that the group does not want to go down the DNSSD path as its main discovery mechanism. Core Links was well in progress by then, and we anticipated that resource directory would be a way of centralizing all this information. So I said, well, there at least should be a way to export information about CoAP resources into DNSSD directories. So I did a draft. It was co-authored with Zach. The decision was taken at IETF 86, I believe, in Orlando, to include that information as an appendix in the RD draft. At that point, I stopped working on the submission because I thought the job was done. So the part that's being split out right now consists of actually 2 elements. There are some attributes that are removed from the RD draft that would make it, in my opinion, impossible to specify those resources that you did want to split out. And then the DNSD mapping part, in my opinion, is pretty straightforward. It doesn't say how resources get, or how link information gets from the RD into a DNS directory. It just specifies a semantic mapping so that you make sure there's a one-to-one way to do this. So from my perspective, one last thing, that is that the current charter does require us to come up with a way to do this, to export these, these links into DNSSD. So from that perspective, I would like to see these published at exactly the same time, and I would like to see them in the same document. So the final point I'll make is that the split, even if a consensus was reached in Seoul, was not discussed on the list as it should be. So we have to discuss it on the list in any case, in my opinion. Thank you.
So I agree with the last point.
This is Akbar. Well, I think Kerry did a very good job describing everything. I support him, and I don't think it should be split off into a separate document. I think the problem is that the RD draft has been dragging on for a long time. So maybe your intent was somehow that this is going to speed up the RD draft, but I think it's just going to make the RD sort of overall solution weaker, and people looking for various pieces that they expect to find in there, like DNSSD, are not going to find it, and it's going to be more confusing. And I think you're causing more problems than solutions by continuing with the split. So I would not do the split.
Stuart Cheshire from Apple. I think I'm going to echo that. I want to start by thanking Kerry for the work he's done here. As you know, I've spent a lot of time working on service discovery, and it did puzzle me when the core community said, well, we've got this service discovery technology that's pretty mature, we've had for 10 years, so let's invent a new one. And I never understood the reasons behind that, but that has happened. I think the work that Kerry has done to establish the semantic mapping, that even though the protocol is different, the concepts are compatible, I think that is valuable. Partly the reason I'm in the room now is, as I said, I've not been tracking Core closely, but Apple is now getting involved with things like HomeKit, and the home automation space is now something I have to pay more attention to. I was at the Thread group meeting in Atlanta last month and had very interesting discussions about service discovery. and actually they asked me to give a little impromptu presentation, and got a lot of surprised reactions from the group saying, oh, well, we didn't know DNSSD could do that, and we didn't know it could do this, and so why are we doing core links again? What's the point? And of course, I couldn't answer that question. It did make me realize that maybe I have not done a good job of explaining the whole DNS service discovery overview, and that's why I came to the microphone right now. The last session today is the DNSSD working group, and if you're free, Carsten, and anybody else, I'd love you to come, because we're going to start that session by me presenting an overview of all the different building blocks, how you can use unicast, how you can use multicast, how you can do use DNS updates to push data into the DNS and DNS queries to get it out. And I hopefully seeing that architecture presented might make it clearer what can be done here. In terms of this document, I think if you keep them together, you can maintain the semantic compatibility. I think if you split them apart, there's a real risk of drift, so there's no way to glue the two protocols semantically back together again.
Hi, this is Hannes. So we are not using DNSSD from this document, so I don't care too much about how it proceeds. I understand the logic behind Kerry and so on, and also I appreciate the work they have spent into. The challenge for me is to see in like people have different preferences. I don't understand what the preferences are based on, oh, I worked on this and I now want to see that work getting published, or is there actually more behind it? Like, are people actually using it, deploying it in a way that these people envision?
What is it?
The DNSSD for this specific use. I appreciate that Apple now expresses interest in using some standards. So far, that hasn't really been the case in any of the IoT work. But for us, we use part of the resource directory, and we want to see that published as soon as possible. If this effort makes that go faster, the splitting, I mean, great for us. We don't care about the others. If it's faster to get it published combined, we just ignore the DNSSD part. Just really pragmatic.
Stuart, again, just to give some more background there. One of the things that I would like to see happen with Thread and 6LoWPAN, and this is why I was asked to participate in that, is other people are looking to see this as well, is 6LoWPAN has the potential to be a general purpose IPv6 network that can be used for all networking, not just for CoAP. So it's not just for thermostats and light switches, but a general v6 network. And for that to be useful, it has to have general service discovery. So the Thread border gateways are going to have DNS service discovery proxies in them to facilitate general purpose networking. And if CoAP can't fit in to that DNSSD machinery, then that's going to be very awkward. It actually doesn't bother Apple because all HomeKit devices use DNS service discovery, so they will work fine. But if we want CoAP devices to be able to work with this infrastructure that the border gateways provide, there has to be some way to map those semantics onto the DNSSD discovery proxy functionality.
So can we stop arguing against the strawman that DNSSD is being removed, because that's not the proposal?
Dave Taylor. So this is another document that the OCF depends on in a non-certifiable way right now, meaning there apparently is an implementation, although I haven't looked at it. And the documents informatively reference it because it can't normatively reference it because it's still a work in progress, right? And so it's another thing, just like the CoAP TCP, that they would like to use in the future in whatever fashion it is at that point in time. One of the other technical issues is the reason that I led the breakout session in the thing-to-thing research group, which is about the discovery aspect, which I think does need a little bit more work on. And I'll get to the relationship with DNSSD in a second here, but let me mention the issue is, how do you discover the resource directory? Okay. And so what the document says right now is, there's 6 or 7 different ways you could possibly do, and here's a neighbor discovery option, right? Which does entail changes to the thing that sends the neighbor discovery option and the thing that receives the neighbor discovery option. So there's a little bit of an extra deployment burden that's there. But one might observe that there's already ways of discovering the thing that you talk to with DNSSD, like your DNS server, that would not entail such changes. Okay, and so the discovery problem has already been solved for DNSSD, and so if you use DNSSD, then you already have that. If you don't have that, then you have to have one of the solutions of which only one is specified in the document right now, which has an extra deployment burden. So something to think about is to say, is there ways to improve the discoverability, and maybe out of those 6 other ways, at some point, maybe in a different document or whatever, somebody wants to specify another one. But the point is, if you use DNSD, you don't have to.
Hi, this is James Widia, Google. I'm also a contributing participant in the technical committee developing the Thread Border Gateway document for the Thread group. And I'm basically here to echo what Dave Taylor and Stuart Cheshire just said. I'm particularly concerned about the problem of how to discover the resource directory service. That doesn't seem to be quite as well thought out as it is with DNSSD, and that's causing me some problems and the rest of the Thread group's effort to develop border gateways, particularly for home network environments. But I think the commercial working group that is working on enterprise deployments is also struggling with this. So I don't know about this question about splitting DNSSD into a separate document, but I do know that this problem of discovering the core resource directory services is an open problem that is giving me a lot of grief, and I don't think I want to see this document published until that's better. There's a better story for that. Thanks.
This is Hannes. I have a question for Dave Taylor. And when he said that the OCF has a dependency on this document, what specific parts of this document do you have a dependency on the resource directory or on the DNSSD part? Or both?
Again, it's an informative dependency in terms of this is what we'd like to do in the future. It's not certifiable yet. But the point is that today, if you're trying to do discovery of resource servers, okay, there's a number of limitations with just using multicast to discover them directly for which a resource directory is useful. So for example, it spans multiple subnets, or multicast is really lossy, or the all CoAP nodes address doesn't work because the port is filtered by the AP as opposed to the MDNS port that goes through, or something like that. So these issues sort of motivate for why it would be useful to have a resource directory in the future, independent of what the protocol is. Okay. The implementation uses the non-DNSSD part of it. The implementation that, I think it was Samsung, did an implementation of the draft that included just a regular CoAP unicast to the resource directory for retrieve things, but they don't use the core links format, they use the OCF links format. Okay? And so in the resource directory, where Michael and I have been pushing is to try to get OCF to converge on IETF technology as much as possible. And so for a resource directory, that just means that an ideal resource directory that could support both link formats is one that could have the same links sort of in a internally, it doesn't matter how it's stored internally, but right. But when you ask for a request, you're asking for the response to come back in a particular format, right? Like the accept header, I forget what the name of the CoAP option is. And so the resource directory would respond in whatever format that the client had asked for, whether it's the OCF format or the IETF links format. It's the same data, right? And so that would be the ideal implementation of a resource directory. And what protocol you're using to access it, whether it's CoAP or DNSSD or CoAP TCP, whatever, doesn't matter. But the current implementation that Samsung did, my belief is that it is unicast CoAP and returning the CoAP link format. But we've been trying to push this as don't have it be an OCF specific way of doing a resource directory. If it's a resource directory, it's just a resource directory, not an OCF resource directory.
Yeah, the reason why we didn't run into that problem with the discovery is because we focus more on an industrial setting, and we are not sort of randomly discovering nodes that happen to be in the same network, but instead it talks to an on-premise or server or a cloud-hosted server. And so you basically have the address of the resource directory in the code, essentially. Yes. Well, hard-coded for that specific. The OEM needs to know on which server it's going to use, because and that makes a lot of sense because you also need to have security credentials with that server as well. I just recently did a webinar to explain how this works for the sort of industrial environments. I understand it's different in the home environment, but we don't offer a solution for the home environment.
So maybe if I can just very quickly comment something like, from the minutes I'm taking, from the notes I'm taking, like the discussion is not whether to have DNSSD or not. It's about the split of the document, really. What I didn't quite get is the main concern for the split. Like, why not the split? We're not saying this is not going to be part of RD.
Again,
Yep.
the split includes two sections. There was section 9, which included attributes that would be necessary to make this function in the first place. And from that perspective, those attributes have to remain in resource discovery. Otherwise, there's no way for an entity that's trying to register to even express the concept that it wants the information to be exported, number one. And number two, the other attribute that's being deleted is the instance attribute. So today, if I go into a very large network and I say, I'm interested in finding the ambient temperature sensor, and there's 5,000 temperature sensors, but there's no instance variable or instance attribute to discriminate which one of those things is the ambient temperature, is the ambient one that I'm searching. I'm not sure how I even discriminate between different RTs today. So I would argue that, what's being split out is information that's vital to exporting into any other kind of directory system. Now, to the point of bootstrapping discovery in the first place, I just want to add that every iOS handset, every Android handset, every Linux implementation, every Macintosh, they already have DNSSD. So, if you're going to find the RD in the first place, I mean, I guess I would just hate to say, I would hate to feel that we're trying to negotiate. One reason behind the split is because some SDO has already, sort of based their standards on this, and so they want to see it get out the door as soon as possible.
I don't think that's the case. I think the case.
I've raised 3 different issues, but the first point was to your direct question about, the split itself.
So, if I'm not mistaken, I remember when we discussed it, which, by the way, you're totally right that this should have been on the mailing list. That's something that we will do no matter what. But the alternative that some were proposing was to put it on the appendix, for example. If it is a mandatory kind of thing, the appendix usually is for examples for all the things that are not really as vital to the main specification. So I'm kind of surprised that you are against the split, but you are not against having it as an appendix. So, sorry. Yeah.
I don't think it matters. You can say this appendix is normative.
All right.
For if you care about this functionality, it doesn't matter. Just
maybe we can finish with Michael, and then either way we have to take this to the mailing list. And I didn't know that it was going to be such a long discussion. I'm really happy to see a lot of new faces in the group. Actually, I hope that all of them will be contributing later on as well on the document, not just on the mic. Yep. And maybe Michael, please, as author.
Michael Koster, Samsung. I don't know if the mic's working. I'll just talk loud. So there are really 3 technical parts here that can be separated out. Finding an RD using DNSSD sounds like a great idea, right? I'd be happy to add that to the draft. Putting EXP and INS is general functionality that may be useful to have in RD as well, because one allows you to differentiate instances of things, and another one allows you to give a hint as to whether things are exported. On the question of whether the actual mapping and binding part of DNSSD belongs in RD, I'm still unconvinced. I think that we might end up with a better product by having 2 separate documents where the DNSSD part explains itself well with an introduction section and is a standalone document. That's my only comment on that.
Yeah, it seems to me that one thing we achieved with acting on this split was to have lots more DNSSD people in this room. So that's a good, at least intermediate result. I think we have to take the discussion to this. Michael, you had a couple of slides on the resource directory itself. I'm not sure
I don't need your slides summarize everything perfectly.
Okay, good.
So it's just more words to say the same thing.
Okay. Thank you. So we will make the decision whether to do the split on the list. And apart from that, I haven't heard any arguments against using the GitHub process for this. And I haven't heard anybody speaking against adding Christian as an editor here. Yeah, we are now about 20 minutes late. So we are now in the management over CoAP segment. And maybe we can compress this a little bit, but probably not too much. So Michel, do you want to say something about the Yang-Sieber document?
Hi, Michel Verriette from Trinium. About this CBOR, Yang to CBOR mapping draft, we did included all the comment after IETF 97. The biggest change was to move the definition of the identifier, the SID, to this draft. So we don't have any more normative reference to draft. So this will be the first building block for this COMI work. So that's the first draft that has to go in, and all the other drafts will reference that first draft. So document is stable. We received no further comment since February 7. So the question today is it ready for the working group last call? So I don't know if somebody has some comment about that. Carson, you have a...
So who has read a recent version of the Yang-Sieber mapping? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Who thinks we are in a state where we can say this is finished? We can do a working group last call? Okay, that's fewer hands. So who does not think? What was that? You don't think? Or?
Yes, I think it is ready.
You think it is ready? Okay. So who does not think it is ready? So I would take this as in-room consensus that we will have a working group last call now. We will take this to the list as usual. And maybe I should just add a quick comment on the discussion we had yesterday. We met with a few Yang doctors. Alex, do you want to say something about that? Or?
Yeah, so a short question about this. I sent you some slides. I'm not sure if you actually saw that there were a couple of slides on this. So if you want, you can use them, or you can just continue.
On the Yang-Sieber or on the other documents?
On the discussion yesterday and on the SID.
I didn't get those.
Okay, so I have them. If you want, you can just present it, or we can use the
Did
slides.
I put them in somewhere? No.
So the thing was that I sent some slides on this, so we can either use them or yeah.
But,
you can go.
so I think that the quick summary is we had a pretty good discussion. I think it is now generally accepted that this will happen. This is observation number 1. Observation number 2, there is now enough interest from the young people that we can make sure that they actually look at this, at least in the working group last call. Also a very interesting feedback was this may be good enough to use with big boxes as well. So we discussed this. I think that there was also pretty much consensus that we don't want this to cause scope creep right now. We are not going to change the document to make it any easier for the big boxes to work with this. But I think it's interesting to hear that there is interest in making this happen for big boxes as well, and there doesn't seem to be anything in the way of doing that. So I think that was a pretty good input yesterday, and that would support going forward with this now. Okay, so I think we're going to play a little bit of ping pong. Who is presenting this part?
Do you have the slide on the library?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. So the library is used as an application discovery mechanism. That's something that already exists in the main Yang. So we're proposing a constraint version of the Yang module library. So we just added the constraint in front of the title of the original one. So the modification we did is to extend the caching mechanism to multiple servers. So it's not now tied to a single server. You could have thousands of servers that use the same identifier, so you could cache for all of them. All the leaf that is in red on the slide is now represented by a number instead of a string. So it's represented by a SID identifier, schema item identifier. The namespace leaf is no more needed because SID is globally unique. You don't need a namespace. So that one was removed. The schema, which is the URI to find the schema, this has been removed. So schema can still be retrieved, but based on their SID, not based on the URI. URI was just considered too large for this constraint version. And the conformance type, it's in string in the original, but it's an enumerator, so it will be encoded in CBOR as a number. So no changes in functionality, but it's really just a constraint version. It's a normative reference for Komai, so that's why it's important to make progress. So to put this second building block to introduce Komai. So the question today is, it's ready for working group adoption.
So who has read this document? One?
Peter
has not read the document?
Peter, you send comments. Maybe.
Yeah, one concern I have with this document is not that it's a bad document, but is this the working group that understands these things? So who in this room actually speaks Yang? Well, okay, that's a few. So maybe, so who of these people would be interested in reading this document? Okay, that's about the same set. That makes me a bit more happy about where this document might go. But I think we don't have enough people in the room right now who have read it to actually have a consensus.
Yeah, so Alexander, a short note about this. I think that the meeting yesterday that was attended by almost 20 people was a starting point where we could find readers from other communities that can come. So right now, as you said, there is an interest, and the young people didn't speak SID until now, and the SID people, well, who speak Yang, of course, but this is a Yang thing. So I think that there is a much greater interest right now in these types of documents. So it would be of interest. And one of the questions that came up yesterday was, okay, what do we do with this efficient IoT thing that you've done here? Yeah, it's a very nice technology, and our core routers could really use it. So, it would be a shame if something happened to it. Right. So I think that we should really work in a very efficient way on all the documents that are in a very, very good shape in the Komai set, and get through with them so that we have our IoT, we have them for IoT. And then the routing community can adopt them. But for us, keeping the core work IoT focused, right? And then they can get enriched. And if we like continuously push away things and like say, okay, well, the decision we'll make later and later, then I think that the work will diverge in a very unproductive way. So I like this work, and I think that now we'll have new type of reviewers. So yeah.
So I wasn't asking for pushing things away, but I was asking for reviews. So I think the next step should be on the mailing list to ask for reviews and opinions whether we should be adopting that. And when we have a little bit of a critical mass, then I think the chairs can make a decision. Thank you. Okay, so the other part, apart from the Yang part, with the Yang part, we have a way to exchange Yang documents in CBOR, but we still have to decide what we want to do with them.
Okay, it's me. Okay, please, next slide.
You can also use this thing.
Okay. Oh yeah, I can. Okay, so the COMI draft is already in a well, rather advanced version. It has been gone through many reviews, I mean, and well, changes, etc. I'm now in the state of version 0. We use iPatch and Fetch from the core Edge one, and we use the Yang to CBOR from Yang CBOR, as has been mentioned. I wanted to discuss 3 issues today, from which I should like the working group input. That is the iPatch content format and the Fetch content format that could be used, and also the notification payload. So 3 issues. For example, the patch content format, this is what's currently in the draft. Well, there are 2 ways that we can have the content transported. The set of identifier value pairs is either by going to a new draft, which is being to be done, which is an extension of the JSON merge patch, which is a CBOR merge patch, but which also extends to arrays, which is not finished, which is quite general, can be used by many other applications and not only be used by COMI. On the other hand, you can use a COMI-only notation, which has been proposed already in the Yang to CBOR document, and which is actually more compact. So this is my dilemma. What do we, which way are we going to do? Something which is more elaborate, takes a bit more space, but it is more in general, or do we say, no, this COMI has to be as small as possible, and so we go a little bit in a separate way? So that is the question to the working group. I've got a very small example where we use the CBOR merge, and you see that the item to be changed, which is 5135, which is the SID value, has to be set to true, and that is how you could do it actually with the CBOR merge document, which is in preparation, or you can do the COMI only, where you have this identifier, which is 5035, which tells you what the value is of the key item, and that should be set to true. So, please, reactions. Efficiency, but COMI only, or more general and less efficiency.
Okay, Alexander Appel here. So, just to make sure that we understand the question that you're asking me. You are asking to wait for something that does not exist to be finished someday in a different working group, and that is less efficient.
Absolutely.
Or something that exists and that we have running code and that is specified and that is efficient and that is there and which we are ready to deliver.
Oh, you can be so clear, but about the existence,
okay,
no, it exists.
Thank you very much.
Don't say it's correct. It's very clear, but it exists, but it is not finished. Okay.
Michel Veillet, Trillion. Not sure why you say it's more efficient, because there's less functionality. Today it doesn't support deletion of list instance.
The deletion will actually be in it. It is a matter of discussing what kind of, how you call this? Item. Okay, leave it. So what kind of expression we should say to delete a part? Yeah.
Okay. Basically, I have three issues about this merge. First, all COMI method is based on two construct, instance identifier and values. And this will be a departure from that concept, which reduce the code reuse. My second problem is the current version does not support delta encoding, so the payload will be significantly larger. And my third issue is the parsing is need to be schema aware to difference between the keys and the values. Keys used as selectors and values used to be applied or to. So, and the fact there's no deletion of list instance. So that's the fourth one. So I think we have a great solution already in the document.
Clear.
This is Matthias. I was a bit confused. Do you have to nail this fully down? I mean, we have this content negotiation and all that. So if at some point you have this nicer format available, this could be also supported.
Okay, yeah, there's that aspect as well. Yeah, correct.
Carsten Bormann, what Matthias said, and also I am a co-author on the merge patch document, and I think it's really neat. However, maybe actually doing something that is less powerful here is the better way to do things, because using the approach of essentially using these arrays of identifiers and values, we get a symmetry between the patch situation and individual puts, or when we go to the next slide, individual gets.
Okay.
So for an implementation, it may be much easier to simply offer both. And we might be in a difficult situation where we have implementations that do offer get and put, but do not offer patch and so on.
Okay.
If we make them too different.
Okay.
So again, I'm a fan of this merge patch idea. I wouldn't be writing, helping write it. But I think for this as a start to get things going, maybe the simpler approach is the better one.
It's very clear. So we take the more efficient one, which is already existing, and we may eventually extend to the more intricate one. Okay, very good. That solves the next one. We will do the same response. Then there was the notification payload. There is a way to send it where you have a notification which has an identifier, which is here called 60010, which has some two attributes. And sometimes you want to send the same attribute, you want to send the same item with the same attribute value several times with different load. Now, what is proposed is that you do that in an array. So in the example to the right, you see that two notifications have been sent in an array. What is proposed is that when you have an optimization, is that when you have a single item and not multiple items, that you do not use the array concept, but you set it as a single item. So there is not, how you call it, there is a discrepancy here. Actually, it should be an array with a single item in it, but we propose to send only the single item. Any comments on that optimization? No, just go forward. Okay. So the next steps for the draft is that we have to do a few to-dos. There is an error handling. One of the things we have in the error handling is that you have the normal co-op errors, but we want to specify more in detail typical COMI errors. Now, the idea is that we develop that a bit better and see what is actually needed, and maybe we may even remove it so that we don't need all these specific errors in it. The content format review, well, it's now it is decided what way to forward, so we go forward like that has been done. The default notification stream functionality is another item. I think we don't put it in. What do you think, Michel? There was a suggestion by you that we have in the notifications we sent in that there is some default information which will be delivered.
The plan is to put that on a Yang module
Okay, fine.
dedicated to event logger.
Okay, fine. So we forget that. So then we just remove the mistakes and the typos.
So that functionality to add generic information to notification, like if you want the time of the event or a signature or so that will be handled as a Yang module and not within the protocol.
Okay. So the proposal then is, given all these modifications which have to be done, let's say in 2-3 weeks we have a new document, and that might then go to WGLC. Is that feasible?
Yeah, so we need that next version of the document, and then we can decide whether it's ready for working with last core. But I think it's shaping nicely, so that should be possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Michelle, I don't think we need these slides here. No, okay. So we are 20 minutes behind schedule. And so we have about 9 minutes left to start with the OSCORP work. While Francesca is getting up, I just want to show this slide. This is the referenced by list that you can find on the data tracker for the OSCORP work. So just to show there is some interest. And there are a number of documents that have a normative reference, and there are also others that have informative references. So you can look this up yourself. I just wanted to show it quickly so it's not an empty list.
Thanks. So I will skip the first slide. Will be presented on Friday, if that's okay, because I want to go to the one thing that we want to discuss today. So I also go really fast on the rest of the slides. So this is a slide of presentation of what OSCOAP is and the motivation behind it. So OSCOAP is a security option built into CoAP that provides end-to-end confidentiality, integrity, and replay protection. Motivation is lightweight, can be extended to secure group communication, and supports client and server changing roles, as well as observe and block wise. That is the one thing that we want to discuss today. Some related work. The draft status. So this is the GitHub for the OSCOAP draft. You can go there, you can see the commits, the latest version, and the issues. There were a couple of changes that were implemented according to some requests from the last version of the draft. These were motivated by per packet overhead reduction, memory usage reduction, and we tried to clarify sections about, for example, options processing and some other things that were raised in the mailing list, like node restart. So I won't go into details, but maybe if we have time on Friday. Yeah, this is the link to the issues. I believe there are 22 open issues left, of which 10 are part issues and a couple more require more core input. And I want to thank Christian, Jim, Alicia, and Martin for all the useful inputs. About the interop, we had 2 interrupts, one month ago, and it was 2.5 hours with 2 implementations tested. 17 tests were done, and we got really good feedback about those. So we will improve the test spec, and it was successful. And the other one was at the hackathon. So it was 1 hour, so it was much faster to run 11 tests, and it was for version 0.2 with some modification that will be included in version 0.3. And as Carsten said, there will be more interop to come. So now to go to the interesting part, blockwise. So this is one issue that is still left in the draft, and we would like to have the working group input on that. The problem is that blockwise does not distinguish between multiple concurrent requests. And this is true independently of if OSCOAP is used. So I will like to leave the word to Christian that is in the queue to present this problem and a solution proposal.
So Christian, we are seeing you. We are not hearing you. He's still muted.
If
We don't hear you.
If someone can ping Mitico on Jabber, maybe.
No audio.
Okay.
In the Jabber.
He said he did some tests before and it worked. Good.
So maybe we. Yes. Okay.
In wait for Christian, let's just start his part of this. So Christian actually has a proposal for how to handle the problem with blockwise, and it's based on something called the request tag, which is the analog of eTag, but working on requests, whereas eTag would work on responses. So the problem is essentially that if you have a body of a message that's being split into multiple payloads, then you don't have an identifier for the whole body. So these individual payloads can actually be interchanged without noticing if that's there. So there's an attack on the next slide. So this is sort of a mock-up simple example where you are using think of it as a two-block type of firmware update, where the first block, this is version 10 of the firmware being put from to the device, and the first block gets through, but the second block is actually blocked and stored by an attacker. And when there later is a firmware update for version 11, also with two blocks, this time the second block is injected from the first one. And this will not be detected by, even if you're using DTLS or OS co-op. So is this a bad application doing this type of firmware update? Yes, this is not how you would generally do it. And what is the result of this? Well, the device might be bricked or something like that. So this is, the intention here is just to point out that this type of functionality is something that we do want to protect against, and that's a general problem. And that's then this request tag is one way to address it. Carsten, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just two comments. This would be detected by DTLS.
No, not within the replay window. So if there's a replay.
Yeah, if you are.
So if this is second firmware updates comes within the replay window, so there is still a valid message within the replay buffer. It would not be detected.
The first block was blocked. Yeah, I agree with that. The second observation is maybe it would help to make more explicit that this is about block 1. So block 2 has eTag already, so we have solved that problem.
Yeah,
there.
That was in the previous slide here. So it's
right.
So eTag is not the problem.
Right. And so far, I think this is the best solution I have seen for the block 1 problem. So I'm not aware of any better solutions to do this.
Okay. So this is Christian's third slide on request tag, and so there is already a draft. Did I point that out? So yeah, there is the draft submitted after the cutoff, draft AMSUS core request tag. So that we think is a very good proposal, and we need to develop that further. And this is also useful for OS co-op in particular. I think I leave this slide open because we are approaching the end. Do you want to continue?
I can finish, I guess. The summary, all major updates are done. blockwise, as I said, the main outstanding issue. We have had several security reviews, and we know of 4 implementations and 2 more planned, even 3 maybe. And next steps, we still welcome further reviews from co-op experts that we feel like we are missing, and we are planning more interop. And then after that, working group last call.
So who in this room has read this request tag thing? I mean, it just came in on
This
Monday
was
morning.
submitted yesterday, I believe. So
at least 1, 2,
3.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it would be useful because this is not an extension to object security. It really is an extension to the base CoAP protocol. It would be useful if more people who are working on base CoAP implementations would look at this request tag thing. That is something we will have to solicit on the mailing list. But it looks like that would be a way to solve that problem. So it's likely that we would take it on if we don't find a better way to solve the problem. Okay, and apart from that, I'm hearing a schedule here. So I'm hearing that you plan to go for working group last call in Prague. The people who are working on OSCOPE, is that a realistic schedule? Do we think we will close those 20 issues and not generate 40 more in the time till Prague?
Well, as we said, we would like more co-op experts review just to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Jonas Elander.
It's on.
It's on? Okay. So this issue with blockwise is just one example of how we find corner cases in co-op. When you try to sort of building security into co-op, we have to examine all these corner cases. And we are, although we have read specs very carefully, it would be perfect if some of the authors involved here for co-op, blockwise, observe, etc., would actually go in here and see that we have made the right assessments. Thank you.
Okay, Dave has the last word.
And for anybody that wasn't in the thing-to-thing interim meeting with OCF, right, this is one of the things that OCF was looking at, trying to evaluate whether it would meet their needs or not. And so we can probably have a hallway discussion or barb off or something this week between a couple of us to figure out whether OCF would use this as is, whether it would need modifications or what. So as you said, you were looking for reviewers. Yes, OCF is reviewing this and trying to provide some feedback. So
great, thank you. Okay, it looks like we ran out of time. Thank you, Francesca. So we'll take up this in our spillover segment on Friday and see you all at 11:50 on Friday.
Please bring the blue. Thanks, Mohit.
What is the Yes. Well, we did